Okay, hopefully those lovely starting technical difficulties have been solved and you can all see us on YouTube. Welcome to the very first London Feminist Academic Collective webinar. That's quite a mouthful, so we are LFAC for short. We're a group of like-minded female students, university workers and academics who all met last year at UCL's Women in Education event in February. It was an absolutely fantastic event, and in a room down on the ground floor where we were surrounded by trans activists, we came together and decided to create a space for women in London who wanted to talk about what matters to us and why talking about women matters within academia. Tonight, we are platforming women at various stages of their career and who have incredibly interesting stories to tell. We will have the absolutely infamous Professor Jo Phoenix. Jo Phoenix is a professor of criminology and the founder of the Open University Gender Critical Network. Jo was cancelled for stating that sex matters and has recently won her employment tribunal against the Open University, and we will be discussing that later. We also have Dr. Rose Rickford, an interdisciplinary feminist qualitative social scientist, currently researching women's education and training in the 1970s to 1990s Britain. And we will also be hearing from Veloci, an anonymous PhD student who's going to be highlighting the battles we are facing, not just here in the UK, but across the world. Each woman is going to speak for 15 minutes roughly, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. So please do keep your questions coming in the chat on our YouTube stream, and one of our LFAC members will be collecting them and asking them at the end. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. You will not be seeing Veloci because Veloci has had to remain anonymous, as said, due to the backlash against women speaking about what matters to us, about being a woman. So you will see my face as I listen. And Veloci, welcome to LFAC's webinar, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. This is very important to me and most of us.
Thank you. I wonder if you can give us a summary of what you're experiencing and why it is that you're coming here to speak today.
Yeah, so throughout my PhD, and since I am aware of the issues that are going on around women and women's studies, and well, we all know, I've been facing not as much as others, but some questioning about my research being focused on women and girls. So I've had a few events on that. And also because I teach as well, the place I teach is also, I kind of been forced in a way to teach trans laws and ideas as progressive and what we should be looking forward to. So at the beginning of my PhD, I went to, or I had this encounter. This was online, an encounter of PhD students at one university in Spain. And this university is well known for being very pro-queer. And I was questioned by a senior French scholar that she was listening to us about my choice of not including trans women in my studies, and that why I didn't, or I wasn't being more open. So she questioned me on that, and why, like I said, okay, just because it happens like that, this is my decision. And she said like, oh, okay, like, but in a very, I don't know, not very nice way. She was kind of not upset, but yeah, she didn't like that much. Then when I was doing my international PhD in a Latin American country, I met a well-known TERF. She's a writer from that country, and we took a picture together. And one of my supervisors saw that picture, and then she didn't say anything to me directly, but she questioned her. She started talking about, because this writer in particular, she had a contract with a publishing house canceled because of her gender critical views. So two books of her weren't published because of that in the very last minute. And then this supervisor was started like ranting about like kind of she deserved it. Obviously, it had been the mistake of the publishing house because they didn't investigate this person well, so they would know beforehand that she was tough, so they wouldn't make any contract with her. And also students were in the place I worked. Some of the things that they are being taught to answer in exams, this is in the UK, taught as the correct answer for their exams is directly linked to gender ideology and let's say like the right question to talk about discrimination and transphobia is saying that a man, if a boy is born a boy, is going to remain a boy and is going to stay a man forever. So that's what they have to answer. What else? And the manipulation around like the discourse. Like for instance, we were analyzing in Spain. It's very queer at the moment. The agenda is very strong in Spain, and we were analyzing one of the discourses of one of the ministers there that she is very pro-queer, and then another politician talking against this trans ideology. She didn't say anything. She never said that she was right-wing. She never said that she was transphobic or whatever. She was just questioning about the puberty blockers and all these things around children and surgery and stuff. But then the questions after listening to that video were linking directly her words to be right-wing and transphobic, homophobic, racist, and all this and all that. So it's these shown to teenagers again here in the UK. So there's a lot of manipulation on the topics. I am kind of worried. I have worries because I will be soon like by the end of this year, I will be presenting my doctoral thesis and to a panel in Spain because I'm doing it with a Spanish university. And my thesis is very openly tough and openly critical towards woke discourses and ideas, and also liberal feminism. And one of my worries is at the moment, seeing everything that in the way it is in Spain, if someone decides to report me, I can get a fee. I can get fined, sorry, for saying that a man is a man and will never be a woman. So I am just expecting to see how is it going to go, because okay, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think so many of us as students in various stages of our sort of academic careers, you know, students, academic workers, PhD students, we're having this issue around being intimidated into perhaps not focusing on women, not centering women, being inclusive and changing our language. And if not, and if holding firm about why it matters, there is this very much a potential backlash against that, both in our personal and professional lives. We will come back to you, Veloci, towards the end. I'm sure many of those people, many of the people watching tonight will have questions for you. But if Jo Phoenix is with us and ready, I'd like to pivot to Jo, who has obviously experienced this backlash and fought back against it. I know Jo's had some technical issues tonight. Jo, hello. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Oh, I can't hear you, I'm afraid, Jo. Oh, hang on. Yep. We'll wait a second. God, what is it? 3 years post-pandemic and we still don't know how to use technology properly?
Can you hear me now?
There we go. We've got you. We've got you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I've been running between phone, laptop, and someone else's computer to try and get something to work, but here I am.
Here you are, and welcome. And Jo, I just want to kick off, and I say this to you as a student, as a feminist, as someone who is so lucky to know you. Thank you and congratulations for your case against the Open University. You have won a landmark case and hands down on every single count. And it is a case that is going to impact all of us. So thank you.
Hopefully.
There's a few people that might not know your case, so I don't know if you want to summarize sort of what happened.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, for those who don't know, I am a criminologist, a professor of criminology. I've got 2 feet out the door, or 1 foot out the door. I'm nearly 60 years old. I'm at the end of my career rather than at the beginning of it. And I've been at it for 30 years, doing stuff around justice, victimization, women, prison, child sexual exploitation, prostitution, a lot of stuff on youth justice as well. So, I'm the academic that you invite when you want to have a very serious and dark dinner party rather than giggles. But in 2019, when I became aware of the Gender Recognition Act consultation and all of the push around self-identification, I was going to, because I'm just a criminologist, I was going to talk about trans rights and female prisons and how we square all these circles that we've got at the moment at Essex. But I got cancelled because apparently I'm a threat and I cause harm. Now, that was just the beginning of a very long story. I also was one of the people who signed both of the Kathleen Stock letters, the famous ones now. In 2021, myself and 5 other colleagues at the Open University, shortly after Maya Forstater won her landmark Employment Appeals Tribunal, and shortly after Aqua Reindorf had published the Reindorf report about my cancellation, this group of 6, including me, John Pike, Hannah Marston, Jess Evans, and Becky Devlin, set up the Open University Gender Critical Research Network. And I've said it in many places, there was a hellstorm of harassment and abuse and bullying and discrimination and poor management of it by my university. In October of that year, I told them that I was going to take them to court for discrimination, bullying, and the whole panoply of things. And eventually, £231,000 later, that was given to me by people who have just been so generous and supported the case. We ended up in the Employment Tribunal for 3 weeks in October of 2023. A terrible 3 weeks. If any of the people here want to talk about the experience of the trial, I'm very happy to do that. And then in January this year, the judgment came through. I think it's weird. It's called the Phoenix judgment. I find that weird. But I've become a judgment. It's really weird. And it found we had 22 grounds of claim. I thought that I would win maybe 3 or 4 of them. And the 3 or 4 that I was fairly certain that we would win were the ones about the open letters. Many of you may know, may not know, in the immediate aftermath after We opened the OU GCRN. There were several open letters that were circulated. Some were placed on the Open University's website. All of these letters said and did the same thing, and that was to accuse us of all manner of things, namely transphobia, to say that by having a research center at the university that was gender critical meant that the university was not adhering to its public sector duties or its EDI duties, and all of them in various ways called for the university to directly discriminate against us by shutting the network down. Or they called it disaffiliating. So what they wanted us to do is just do like our research as a hobby in the pub, rather than have the OU branding. So I was fairly certain we would win on that. I wasn't certain that we would win the stuff that had happened in the 2 years previously. Those who know about the case will know that I got called the racist uncle sitting at the Christmas dinner table by my deputy head of department at that point, and that in the days after I was cancelled from Essex University, I was instructed by my head of department not to talk about the cancellation or my research. So there have been many years of this. Well, we won all of that. I thought it would be ruled out of time because there's legal technicalities around continuous behavior. And if there's a break, they can rule things that happened before out of time. I thought that's what would happen, but it didn't. The court ruled it in time. So I got, the university was found to be unlawfully discriminating against me, unlawfully harassing me. The real win, though, was also the stuff about victimization. So victimization is, again, a technical point of law about how the university acts once you put a grievance in or an employment claim in. And in this case, the university failed to do what it needed to have done in terms of the law, in terms of carrying on with the grievance, even though I'd left the university by then. And then the one that I really didn't expect to win, because it's such a hard thing to prove, was unfair and constructive dismissal. So as you said, Freya, it was the hat trick. And, you know, the day that I read that judgment, I thought, if I die tomorrow, I die happy. So, but if people want to ask about that, I'm very happy. I didn't want to kind of like monopolize tonight's conversation about the judgment, but I'm happy for other people to go there if you'd like. When you invited me to speak, and thank you very much for the invitation, I am relatively older in my career, as I said, and I don't get a chance to speak to young academics or PhD students very much anymore. So it's a joy to be here. When Freya, you contacted me, I thought, well, what on earth can I say about feminist pedagogy? I don't know what I can say about it. And then I began thinking about the fact that I have been in employment as an academic, and I started the year after they made it illegal for men to rape women in marriage, right? That's how long ago. It was 1992 that became unlawful. I started as a PhD student in 1993. At that point, lesbians didn't even have employment rights. So I've seen a lot over these 30 plus years. And I wanted to start with a particular story. I got my PhD in 1997. I then got a job at Middlesex University. Then I went to Bath University. And then by 2007, so 10 years, I got a job at Durham University. I had I had a meteoric career rise. Well, it felt like that to me. It felt like somebody strapped a rocket on my back because I had several successes with research grants and whatnot. So I applied for my professorship, right? And I got it in 2011. And I contacted my old PhD supervisor that day. And I said, oh my God, Pat, I've got my professorship. And she said, congratulations. And I said to her, yeah, but I don't know how I feel about it, because in the whole of Durham University, this was 2011, in the whole of Durham University, there are only 32 female professors, right, in 2011. And Pat said, literally, that many. When I got my professorship, there were only 4. Right now, hers was in I think she got hers in the 80s. So I wanted to start there to kind of note a couple of things. What a tremendous amount of progress women have made in the academy over only the last 10 years. So there's a story of hope that we need to remember. But, and this is where it gets a bit darker, there's a lot of very challenging things happening in universities at the moment about how they are being managed. For those of you who do sociology degrees or social policy degrees, you may know this language. It's the language of neoliberal markets. So universities are now experiencing the full force of marketization, which means that, you know, everyone at the top table, what they are most concerned about is the bottom line. Because as little as 25 years ago, just over 30 years ago, the government used to fully fund universities. Fully, and we didn't have all of these performance measures. We didn't have all these targets that we had to have. Most of all, academics didn't have performance metrics. And I think one of the really cancerous things that young academics have to deal with is understanding how to become either the PhD student and graduate or become the academic when you are in a world where your heart and your desire is about creating new knowledge, and yet you have to actually conform to the demands of a market. Yeah. So that's one thing. The second, I've only got 3 things to say. The second thing I want to say is this, that where you have the demands of a market, a university management system is never going to want too much disruption. And I think that drive to just keep the business going and bring the money in is one of the reasons why academic managers and the leaders of universities have abjectly failed in their leadership on this issue. Because if our students are our consumers, then we need to keep our students sweet, and we need to offer them what they want. And that means that when students kick off, when they say that they're not safe, when they say they feel harm, universities respond to it, because that's part of that service economic relationship. So I think that in as much as I want to talk about patriarchy, sexism, and all of those, things that drive our feminism, we have to remember the economic analysis here as well, and how that drives cowardice, institutional cowardice. The third thing, and this kind of cuts partly to what happened to me, and if I'm going to say that as feminists going forward, we need to remember one thing and only one thing when we move into our workplace, is this. Am I allowed to swear? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. There's a fucking chasm between the drive not to discriminate and the drive to include. It is as wide as they come, because the drive not to discriminate, and I am fully, signed up anti-discrimination. I don't like discrimination. What that does is repositions us as academics from making sure that we don't do bad things, actual things, that in our processes, our marking, our teaching, that we are not actively discriminating against a group, versus inclusion, which actually is all about, necessarily, it's a subjective state, right? With anti-discrimination, which is that's the world I grew up in as an academic, with anti-discrimination, what you're looking at is, how do we tolerate everybody? How do I sit in a room with that guy, and I'm going to say that man, who I know is as sexist as they come, who I know is a racist, but he doesn't do anything with those beliefs. He just has them, right? And as long as he doesn't push those beliefs on me, then we're going to get together in a department and work together. to whatever aims that we have to. And believe me, I've encountered so many people like that in the course of my academic life. But if you are moving towards inclusion, because that's the subjective state, then immediately you're actually talking about intolerance, a totally different attitude. So I don't know how long I've talked, maybe too much. It's kind of rambly things, but over to you. I think there's a bigger picture here.
There very much is, and thank you. I could chat with you for hours and hours, and I'm sure this won't be the first time we invite you to come and chat with us. But that's one thing that sort of popped up in my head with that is I'm coming at this from a student perspective of thinking about the economics of it and the fact that we are consumers now, and therefore what we want goes. Not a lot of us want this. And this is what I find very interesting is it is a very small yet very vocal group that are shouting about this and that are winning and that are taking control of our institutions, our unions. Our unions do not represent us. And yet when I speak to my fellow students, and yes, I'm a mature student, so maybe it's a little bit different, we're all sort of sitting there going, what's going on? Are we going to go back to reality anytime soon? Are we going to talk about facts anytime soon? I'm fed up with this identity politics and this pandering. So how do we as students and as feminist students, as female students, fight back against this with the economic power we have in our institutions to then say, I want to get taught by someone like yourself who's talking about reality?
A genuine question?
A genuine question, yeah.
You have all of those, for those of you who are doing courses rather than PhD studies, you have module evaluation forms. Use those.
Yeah.
Mark academics down who you think aren't maybe providing the full curriculum. Use the feedback on those. Use your student rep system. The problem here is that you have to be vocal, and so many, and I recognize why so many are afraid of being vocal. So the precondition to being vocal as a student cohort is making sure that you gather together. And like this whole movement for academics for academic freedom, each university has a chapter. I think that each university needs to have academic feminists for academic freedom. Much like what you're doing here with this organization. The precondition is always people have to get together. However, this is where it gets complicated because universities are set up that you're not meant to be able, as students, you're not meant to be able to challenge academic judgment. And that's where the problem is. Velasi, forgive me for going over to your previous speaker. I was listening to you talking about your PhD supervisor. Now, some of that is not academic supervision. And I think that for all students at whatever level, read the rules and regulations. That's the contract that you have, and hold your universities to account. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, it feels very. My decision after listening to her was like, okay, I just have to stay away. Like, my relationship with her changed. We were close because she's not that far from me in age, and also we share some background, so we were close. But then after that, I was like, no, I have to protect myself in a way, and I know she knows that, but like she hasn't mentioned anything else, and she hasn't said anything else after reading my writing. So I'm kind of waiting to see at what point maybe she will, or maybe she I don't know, change her mind. I don't think so, but I don't know.
There's another thing, if you will indulge me, and I don't want to cut across Rose. The other thing that I would, if I had a magic wand and if I could make the OU do the one thing I want them to do, I would make them go and train everyone on whatever institution you're in, whatever country you're in, what academic freedom actually means, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and the second that you get somebody trying to close off questions, that's an immediate, it's partly an ethical issue, But, at that point, that's your way in. Well, hang on a second. I thought that we have academic freedom here, which applies to students as well.
Absolutely. Academic freedom is so key. And we've been to a couple of the events with the group you mentioned, and I think we'll be talking more with them over the coming years, and hopefully with LFAC creating that community and that space for that real feminist academic freedom point of view that's so needed, and that community. And so, Jo, I am going to pass over to Rose now, and we'll come back to you later on with the question and answer session. Thank you. So yeah, moving on then to Dr. Rose Rickford. Rose and I met as she invited LFAC to come and join in with a talk and a workshop given at Philia last year, which is where we launched our group. It was absolutely fantastic, and I learned so much about feminist pedagogy, including that word and how to say it, it took me a while. So following on from what Jo has shared and from what Veloci has shared, I wonder if you can speak to your experiences and how we begin to combat this, the neoliberal patriarchal agenda that is running our institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you hear me and see me? I'm aware that I look like I'm sitting in the dark, but I've got some lighting issues. But is it okay?
I can see you, certainly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really, really, really appreciate it. Hang on, I'm just going to try and sort that out a little bit. No, it's not really helping. That'll do. I really, really appreciate it. And it's absolutely lovely to be here. So I think like what I was hoping to do, to just tell you a bit about me, I've just recently finished my PhD. And I'm now, at the moment, I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Oxford looking at women's education and training in like non-traditional skills, like carpentry and things like that. And my PhD was about grassroots community organising. So what links those things together basically is overall my academic interest is about how organizations and services can meet the specific needs of different people, and how what makes an organization effective for meeting people's needs and supporting flourishing. So I'm really interested, like from a personal perspective in that with universities, but also from an academic perspective in thinking about like what is it that's making universities so bad at the moment at supporting flourishing, both like academically and of the people who are actually in the institutions. I don't think you have to be a glass half empty person to know that universities aren't doing a very good job of supporting flourishing at the moment. So we've addressed like some of the issues here around academic freedom and censorship and bullying, but also there's lots of other issues like, I mean, graduate students are 10 times more likely to be experiencing anxiety or depression than the general population. And we have a workload crisis. We have a huge amount of sexual violence on campus, and that's not to mention all the things we've already talked about, like the bullying and censorship of feminists and the general culture of fear that I think a lot of us are experiencing. So my own personal experience is that I did my degree back in 2004 to 2007. And although a lot of the education I received was quite focused on kind of queer theory and those kinds of things, the environment I was in was very much around thinking and questioning and sort of nourishing. I did my undergraduate degree at University of York in sociology. And then I came back to the academy in 2018 as a master's student, and I found a really very changed atmosphere in terms of both, I suppose, interest in really thinking deeply rather than saying the right things, and also in terms of like high levels of anxiety and fear in general. And I'm not just talking about feminists, I'm talking about everybody. Like this kind of culture of being terrified of the next exam, terrified of, the whole environment felt very much more high stakes. And I think that's probably a lot to do with what Jo was talking about in terms of the neoliberalization of the academy. I think like student fees have made a big difference, staff workloads, the whole environment has changed from being like well away from being a kind of space of supportive learning community and into much more a space of you have to get this degree because otherwise your life is going to be completely over, etc., right? And so I think like that is part of the context of what we're all experiencing, is this very, very like marked shift and change over time in what the university is as an institution. And it's no longer, if it ever was, I think it was in the past focused on developing ideas. I don't think it was ever focused on supporting women to thrive, right? So the university is a patriarchal institution. It's not and never has been designed to support women to thrive. And what women's studies did, what originally was women's studies began to offer spaces that were more focused on women's liberation and women's thriving. And to try to do that within a patriarchal institution is extremely difficult. I think it was always extremely difficult. And it's not like back in the day the universities were like really like up for supporting women's liberation and they were throwing all their money at it. You know, these were women doing things, you know, in the back room with very little resources, you know, and trying to create women's studies curriculums and often, you know, hostile environments. But I think one of the things that's, I suppose, concerning me at the moment is that we're seeing is that one of the things that those original like those feminists doing women's studies in the academy were doing was they were introducing ideas like that education could be for liberation. And they were introducing ideas like one of the roles or functions of something within a university could be to create consciousness raising or to create a supportive, caring environment for female students. And I don't think it's a coincidence that work to try and create more environments that are potentially more focused on people's needs, okay, so if we go back, as Jo said, when her supervisor became a professor, there were only 4 female professors, right? Because the institutions were entirely geared in a very masculine culture, not towards the needs of women and not towards supporting women to thrive. And I think that we make a real mistake if we imagine that what we need to do is go back to a kind of space that was nothing to do with feelings and nothing to do with care and nothing to do with creating environments where those who would otherwise be excluded from or marginalized within education are made space for, right? So I think where we are is needing to find this space where we continue to work towards a feminist liberatory project within the academy in a way that rather than, I suppose, falling back into a space of like, oh, the problem is that we all became too touchy-feely. That's not the problem. The problem is not that we all became too touchy-feely. The problem is that there was an appropriation of liberatory thinking in ways that is against the interests of women and against the interest of material and liberation in general, against the interests of working class students, against the interests of students of colour, because what we're actually dealing with is a situation in which people are paying astronomical fees, astronomical rents, we've got precarious working contracts, right? And these are the real material problems. And it's very easy to focus instead on gender identity because it's a massive distraction from all the real material problems. So what we're actually dealing with is a huge appropriation of work on liberation and within the academy into stuff that is nothing to do with liberation, is nothing to do with actually using the academic structures to change power. So I suppose like what I kind of want to emphasize then is that we don't need to see this as a choice between like the sort of I suppose, you know, gender identity woke sort of all of that like snowflake stuff and you know and right-wing leaning allying ourselves with white identity politics in the Free Speech Union, this kind of thing. Those are not the only options. There are other options that are much more to do with, I think, building sisterhood within the academy, building sisterhood within and without the academy, creating those links, finding ways of building the women's liberation movement in the academy. And for me personally, what my experience has been was I was very, very scared. So I think I came to the first Gender Critical Research Network webinar, and I I typed something into the chat box and under the name anonymous scared PhD student or something. And you know, I was really scared for ages, and it was really, really stressful. And one of the things that I experienced in that time was that it was really affecting my work. And even though my work wasn't directly about the gender ID issue, I felt like it was just stopping me from thinking freely or writing freely or expressing myself. And you know, what I've done and what's worked for me is I think what Jo said, which is creating network, reaching out to other women. And it does take a certain amount of courage, because even if you don't go public, you have to take the risk of reaching out to another woman and saying, I wondered if could we chat about this? And I found that pretty much every time I've done that, it's been really rewarding, and I've ended up, you know, with a really good connection. And that has created like this environment in which I feel much, much safer. And that's why I'm able to speak now, really, is because of feminist sisterly network. So I think what you're doing here is like really fundamental to that. But I would emphasize that I think, although, I mean, I completely agree with Jo about academic freedom, and academic freedom is key. I think it's also really important that we keep a focus on the material needs of women within the institutions, material needs of women in society in general, and that those things are also informing feminist activism on campus. Because I do feel concerned that sometimes we can be drawn very far into focusing only on free speech issues, and I think actually in terms of like reaching more women, there are other very important things that we also need to be focusing on as feminists in universities, I think.
I completely agree. Thank you. Yeah, round of applause as Jo is doing there. That again, you're another woman we're going to be inviting back, I'm sure, Rose. I could spend an hour just talking with you about this. I really could. I'm so glad you've spoken about consciousness raising, about the sisterhood, and about remembering that it's not about, you know, this choice between one way or the other. It's about finding something in between that is real and matters to women, no matter what our backgrounds are and where we're coming from. I know there's a few students that in the last few days I sort of, and you know me, I'm a loudmouth. I say what I think to anyone who wants to hear it or not, but I have been scared to speak. I take off my badges of my, you know, feminist badges on my bag when I go into school, as I call it. You know, I'm scared to wear my suffragette scarf or say, you know, what I want to say. I'm to some extent, but I've started to say, oh, you know, I'm doing this talk. I wonder if you're in, and they really want to hear it. They really want to hear it, and they are interested. And it's creating that sisterhood. That's my cat asking to be let out. Jo, you were messaging about some females, some stats around female representation in university. I wondered, do you want to take over just for a sec while I let the cat out?
Yes, absolutely. So for something that had nothing to do with this thing this evening, but as Rose was talking, Rose, I love listening to you. I really do. And I too, like Freya, could just spend hours talking with you. I dug out some stats. I was very interested at one point around when women got on in the academy, because, you know, the academy I came into, as I said, was not the one that we currently have. And, you know, sexism was really quite permitted. So a little while ago, I decided to dig out some stats on how many females, right, were awarded a higher degree in the UK. In 1970, there were only, for the whole of 1970, there were only 1,751 females who obtained a higher degree. So we fast forward 10 years. These stats are really telling. We fast forward 10 years, and there's an increase, but only a moderate increase. 1980, there were 4,511. And yet, by 1990, that number had gone to 10,419. And by 2000, it was 40,000, right? So, and this is just to dovetail with something that Rose was saying, 1980 through to 1990 is, if you were going to graph this, it was where the upswing was. And of course, it was the 1980s where we saw, you know, feminism hit the academy. And there were, you know, a huge number of feminist they weren't academics, they were students, basically, who were taking a hold of the curricula and driving it. And then they eventually became academics. But there's another stat that I'd just like to share with you. In 1986, right? So I was a second year associate. Yeah, I was a finalist, sociology student at Bristol University. There were only 5,000 females in the whole of England and Wales who had jobs as academics. In 2022, there are 111,925. Now, I dug these out because what I wanted to say about them is to kind of go back to feminist pedagogy, go back to that moment of women's studies. It wasn't a golden moment, right? I really don't think we should romanticize it. I remember living through it. What it was, however, was a highly politicized group of women who were interested in looking into their own conditions of existence. So they were applying the tools of their academic trade, whether it's biology, sociology, law, whatever, to our own conditions of existence. And I think, if as an older academic I could do anything, I would encourage all of you to become your research objects and reinvest and reinvigor universities and research.
I couldn't agree more. And that we've got a list of things that we want to talk about as part of LFAC, and it's about getting that perspective on all subjects and bringing women, centering women back in the research that we're doing and the conversations that we're having, regardless of what the subject matter is. I'm gonna Rose, you popped your hand up for a question, and then we'll hand over to the audience questions. We started a little bit late, so those watching on YouTube, we'll probably go over 5 minutes just so that we get time to ask your questions. Rose, what did you want to say there?
I just wanted to sort of, I suppose, build on that and add and agree, which is that I think one of the things that I think I really hope that we don't lose through all this is there's been an appropriation and abuse of the term lived experience, right? And the importance of lived experience. But bringing lived experience into research is something really important for feminist thinking, right? The realities of women's lives is important, and that can't always be found through, a huge survey. Sometimes it can, but there's a lot of things that can't. And so it's not just about hard facts and statistics. Hard facts and statistics matter, but I think making sure that we think about how we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, like the lived experience is is absolutely fundamental to feminist thinking and to understanding women's lives. And so, yeah, I suppose just building on what Jo said and agreeing.
Absolutely. And I think there is a real risk at the moment, like you say, of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and some of the language that we're seeing, some of the pushback that we're seeing that started in one place is now going to another place. And we need to be very careful that we hold the line as feminists and make sure that we don't get pulled into something that actually is not going to help us in the long run. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We are going to hand over to audience questions now. Olivia has been our moderator on the YouTube channel and is going to be searching through to see what women and I think we've got some men watching as well, want to know and have been asking. Olivia, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you all for your really interesting talks and conversations. It's much appreciated. So a lot of the comments in the chat are kind of about which universities are worth going to. Have you heard of any that are worth it? Is going to Open University worth it? Other than Reading, of course, and the sense that, like, you're right. I mean, students are paying a lot of money, and it's difficult because on one hand, it's like you're right. We don't want universities pandering to them, but on the other hand, for feminist students who they want to make sure they're actually getting a good education, so that's one thing. And kind of off the back of that, because there are now a lot of students really worried about academic freedom, I've noticed there are a lot more metrics coming out about ranking universities about their academic freedom. And I was wondering if you could speak to whether you think that is actually a good thing, or whether you worry that that is kind of buying into the marketization of universities, and could speak a little bit on that. I know, Rose, you spoke about the sisterhood and whether that might be a better alternative. So I don't know if Jo, you want to start?
Yeah, that's a really interesting subversion of the technology. And I think I hadn't thought about it, to be perfectly frank. But as you were saying about, ranking universities by academic freedom metrics, that could have some really interesting subversive effect, quite literally. Particularly if university managers begin, and the people who make decisions at the top begin to realize that the market is shifting. Because trust and believe, I've worked at 6 different universities. I've opened God knows how many degrees. I've pitched lots of degrees to different universities, and everyone does the same thing. If you're going to start a new degree, you do market research first. So that kind of trying to influence how universities think about the market, that might be a really interesting subversive thing. However, even though we can subvert the technologies of neoliberalism, we mustn't buy into them. So then the question is, once you begin to use those metrics to get what you want, then how do you drive that one home? Yeah, that's really, this is why we need all of you. You have interesting ways of thinking that I don't possess anymore.
Yeah, I see, Veloci, you want to add to that?
No, that makes me think of kind of some of the strategies I've thought about to defend myself, or just to tackle that, because one of the things that I've thought is just if whenever I might be accused of being transphobic or whatever, I can just use my reality against that, because I'm sorry if this sounds a bit ugh, but it's just, I'm a Latin American woman, and being if I have to find myself in front of a panel that is going to question me or accuse me for focusing on women and girls from the territories I'm from, the violence and reality that I've witnessed my entire life, and then just use the same kind of, like, I know this is because it's like buying into that same thing again, but in the end we just don't have any other option. Like, I see myself maybe just being forced to, okay, if you're accusing me of this, then I can just perfectly accuse you of racism because and colonialism, because this is a gender ideology which was created in Europe, and it's been pushed against us women from different countries and territories that have been historically oppressed. And if you go to many of these territories and then you ask to those women that are actually being oppressed and suffer the worst part of violence within these conflicts and these territories, they will never ever say to you, I mean, if you come to them to tell them, yeah, a trans woman is a woman, they're gonna say, what? Like, what are you talking about? It's just completely alien in a way to the reality of so many women in those territories, and this is what I'm trying to talk about. So yeah, that just what just Jo just said just made me think of that, and then yeah, just that.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think a lot of us can understand where you're coming from there. Rose, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's well, I think what Veloci's just said about like the realities of women's lives is kind of like fundamentally the point, isn't it? And a lot of, I think, the reason why it's so important to kind of bring women's lives into our learning. I think on the question of the metrics of academic freedom, I think the thing is, well, 2 things. I think a lot of the push for that is not coming from feminists. It's coming from people who have different agendas from feminists, and so that's one concern of mine, and that thing that comes from a progressive place can so easily be appropriated, and I think what Jo said when she was originally talking about the way in which this whole atmosphere has been made possible by this like extremely neoliberal metric focused culture tells me that I don't think I'm against the academic freedom metric. It's not that like I think it's a bad idea in context, but I don't think it's the solution, right? I don't think you can solve a problem that this is a cultural and political problem that's basically come from like the material circumstances of where we are, and that can't be solved with a metric. It needs to be solved with cultural change, and so yeah, I think I'm not against it, but I worry about these things being kind of sticking plasters at best and actually ending up being wielded against the interests of women at worst.
Yeah, I think you're right that they're kind of different intentions, but I suppose it's very difficult for like feminist students to have any kind of way of discerning, like, is this course good? Are these, it's really hard when you've just faced with mountains of courses that you could choose. It's very, very hard for people to choose otherwise without any kind of examples. Jo, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to add just two things. I completely agree with you, Rose. But to the earlier question about when people come to you and say, why haven't you included trans? Or why haven't you included this or that or the other? My response has, my PhD examiner asked me that question about my own PhD. And my response has always been exactly the same thing. That's not part of my objective knowledge. The sociological category I am studying is. I understand what you are saying, but that is not part of my objective knowledge, because the challenge you have if you say, if you turn around to someone and say, yeah, but you are excluding on this basis, is you end up getting into this tit for tat argument, and you can never get out of that. No one's ever going to win that. So it's about returning back, for me, about returning back to the baseline of what it is that we are doing. My objective knowledge is I am studying this. And you don't have to be, unless somebody's going to take your study away from you, or threaten your job or discriminate you, you don't have to be terribly bullish about it. And by that, I mean, you don't have to kind of like, okay, this is going to sound weird. It's almost like coming out. You fear the process more than what happens once you come out. And sometimes that very gentle conversation, that's all.
And that kind of leads me to the next question. There's quite a few people in the chat who seem to be interested in doing a PhD. I'm doing a PhD. And you sort of mentioned students who do modules can give feedback, and there's a really like tangible way of them getting their things across. But PhD students are often straddling this world of, you're kind of a student, you need approval from your supervisor, you're often teaching, so you're kind of representing university in that way, but also when it's convenient, the university will treat you as a researcher. It's whatever's convenient for the university, essentially. And I've noticed in the kind of, you mentioned academics for academic freedom, I've noticed that a lot of PhD students sort of feel like, but I'm not an academic, I'm just a student, and it's very difficult to empower people. Whereas I understand that students who are doing courses and paying money often feel more able to raise their complaints. And so I'm wondering if you think, I'm thinking about what's happened to the University of Bristol in terms of legal cases there, whether you think this particular employment tribunal for academics would cover students, or whether you think there needs to be a new kind of legal win, particularly for PhD students who are often in a really difficult spot.
Would you like me to answer that?
Yeah, yes, let's start with you.
It doesn't cover students because employment rights only exist for employees. And the case that was heard at Bristol just before Raquel's was about the type of duty of care a university owes to its students. It was an instance where a student had committed suicide. And that tribunal, or that hearing, combined with Raquel's, told us something very deadly about our current state of academia, and that's that universities do not owe a duty of care to students beyond a very narrowly defined one. So I think, it's bleak, and I don't know where we begin to untangle some of that. I would just say, and it may be because I'm terribly old-fashioned. Whenever I have a PhD student or anyone approach me to do a PhD, the very, very first thing that I say to them once I take them on is, this is not meant to be a hierarchical relationship. By the time you finish, you will be teaching me. All I'm going to do is give you a few tools of the trade. So for people who are looking for PhD supervisors, it's very, very useful, I think, for you to make contact with them, send them an email and try and get a measure of this person. What's your style of supervision? Any academic should be able to answer that question. What's your style of supervision? And that will tell you a lot.
I'm afraid I'm going to jump in here because we are at time. I think the lesson learned for the webinar 2 is a lot more time to talk because there are so many topics to cover. Thank you so much to everyone that's spoken tonight, to Jo, to Rose, to Veloci. Thank you. I'm sure we will be inviting you back again to dig a little bit deeper into what's been shared. Thank you to everyone on YouTube who's subscribed and are watching. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. This video will be loaded. So you can watch it back or you can share it with anyone that you think should have seen it. Please do follow us on Twitter. We are at London Feminist AC. I think someone should be putting that in the chat, hopefully, and we'll be advertising more events there and hopefully events in person as well for London-based students, workers and academics. We want to create this network so that we can create the sisterhood that Rose, that you've talked about tonight. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and we will see you very soon.
Thank
you very much.